Hey, what's up? Andrew Kramer here, videocopilot.net, and welcome back to another very exciting product reveal. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Element 3D version 2. Some of you know that Element 3D has always been about speed, and in version 2, it's still our top priority. So what we did is reworked the entire render engine. So that's why I've got this engine here rendering, so you can actually see it working. No, we actually reworked it to be faster, to be more efficient. So you're actually going to get way better performance inside of After Effects. You're actually going to get better render speeds. So I've got projects that I created with version 1.6 that render twice as fast in version 2 on the same graphics card. So we really made it more efficient, and we made the pipeline fully take advantage of your graphics card. So after we made the rendering faster, we wanted to make it so that you could work faster. So we redesigned the user interface to be more productive. So here are a few new features. Now, the first thing you might notice is that the preview window renders extremely fast, and that's because it's drawing directly to the screen from the graphics card. Another cool thing that we added are these orthographic views, so you can go to the top view or the front view. You can also bring up a grid. We've got some view options here, so you can kind of turn on some of the different features of the preview window. Go and switch it back. Another thing you might notice is that there is a gizmo so that you can actually move things around. You can even hold Alt, drag, and duplicate objects. And you'll see also that it's in a nice group folder. So this is a way that you can create more complex scenes inside of a single group. Another cool thing you could do is create some basic primitives right inside of Element, so they're all editable, segment size, all that good stuff, so you can start creating some of those basic shapes without having to leave Element. Now, over here in the scene, we have an object. We've got the materials. And one cool thing you can do is you can actually select a material in the preview window. So you can click on it, and now I've selected that copper. I could go down, tweak the settings. Now I've got silver. You can actually select multiple materials this way. So you can hold down Shift, select multiple parts, and actually move them all together. Then, if you just select the main object, you can move it all together as a single part. And the reason that works is Element 3D version 2 now lets you use the mesh as individual objects. So all of the sub-meshes of this object are now visible, and you have independent transform. Now, a couple other cool features. We've got better preview thumbnails to give you a sense of what the materials are. We've added these shortcut buttons to the edit window. So sometimes it could be a lot of work scrolling through a lot of stuff. So now you can just click on the shortcut and it just auto scrolls down to that position. So save you some time, especially if you're just going to do specific things. Say, let me get to the UV mapping. Here, let me get to the transform. So you can jump around a lot faster. We've also got the search bar in the model browser. And you can also add external directories into the favorites, so that way you can get to some of your files wherever they may be. All right, so now that we have this out of the way, let's go and check out some more of the exciting features. Okay, so this is probably one of my favorite new features. We've added real-time physical-based shaders. So what that does is just gives you opportunities to create much more realistic shaders based on actual physical properties. It actually makes it easier to create more realistic materials. So let's jump into the scene setup, and we'll take a look at how it works. So down here, I've got all the physical-based shaders, and you can see some very nice detail. Very, very cool. And one of the main advantages is that I can turn all of the lighting off, and they still are illuminated. So all of the lighting and highlights are all based on the environment map. So if you load some different environment maps, and in this case we have an environment map preset here, and I just got a couple of random ones in here. Let's see, some work in progress. But if we load one, you can see that it totally changes the look of the shaders based on the environment map. And so we can kind of keep clicking through a few different ones here. And there we go. We have a totally different look. Now, you can, of course, add lighting on top of it, so you can have lights and stuff like that, but you definitely get a much more realistic result, and no matter what the environment map is, the shaders will all look realistic relative to each other. All right, let's compare the standard shader and the physical shader. So on the standard shader on the left, we can scroll down and we have our specular setting, and we can kind of control this. But the problem is, if the specular is really blurred out, then the reflection should be blurred out as well. And so already I'm making an unrealistic material that would not and could not exist. Whereas if I come over to the physical shader, all I have to worry about is one setting, and that's the glossiness. So if we take that setting and we turn it down, we're sort of blurring out the reflection. So it's just a simple way to think about blurring a surface. But what's cool about the physical shader is that we can put a texture into the glossy map. And check this out. Now we've created a much more realistic surface because there's variation in the reflectivity and the specular highlights. And we can actually tweak that. So we can come in here, we could turn the brightness up, make it really washed out or nice and sharp. We can even invert it and create kind of like a fogged looking shader, something like that. And it's all real time. So for anyone who's used some of the advanced renderers like V-Ray, you're probably familiar with the glossiness slider. And as you guys probably know, that once you start having blurry reflections, you have to turn up the samples, and the render times get a lot slower. So the cool thing about Element is that you actually can do all of the glossiness effects and do it in real time. So it's very powerful, and the shader itself is actually simpler because you don't have to worry about as many settings. You have reflectivity and refraction just the same. Like, check this out. I'll just turn the reflectivity down, right? So there's no more reflectivity. This is a really cool black material. But watch what happens when I turn up the refraction. Check that out. Now I've got this kind of like ice look, and let's see here. And we've almost got this very realistic kind of ice cube material. And again, it's very easy to make realistic shaders because the physical shader doesn't really allow you to do things that are too unrealistic. But we also realize that people are going to use the shader for motion graphics and advertising, and we have an environment multiplier. So that allows you just to kind of boost the brightness of that particular effect so that you get a much more, intense reflection, because sometimes you want things to really be out there. And, of course, we'll have more tutorials to show you guys how to make all kinds of metal and all these kind of cool things that you can create on your own. Let's just click on a few different shaders here. Let's just take a look so you can kind of see the variation. And, the fun thing is that you can just go into that glossiness map and you can just tweak it. You can invert it, turn the gamma up, play around with the brightness, and you could really create some interesting surfaces. We've got this nice concrete looking wall, ground, and you notice like something like the ground, I don't see all those highlights because the ground isn't that reflective. So you're not going to see those bright highlights that you're going to see on some of these other kind of metallic surfaces. So let's kind of take a look at a few more here. It's where once you get in here and you start playing with real-time physical shaders, it's a lot of fun. It's kind of cool. Now, of course, the standard shader is still really useful because there are times when you need to create unrealistic materials. So we make it so that you can use either one. You just go to the top material type, choose between the standard shader and the physical shader. So I hope you guys are as excited about this as I am. We think it's a big deal. Okay, so here's another really fun feature. So I've got my engine block on this semi-reflective surface, and the only thing that's missing is my reflection. So what we've done is added a feature that allows you to create a mirror reflection on a flat surface. So check this out. If we take the plane object, we can come over to the object setting for the reflect mode, set it to mirror surface, and instantly we get a really cool, very nice looking reflective surface. So I can go into that glossiness map and make some changes. So I can invert it. And you can kind of see how that affects the reflection. So it's kind of diffused. I can even increase the normal bump amount, and that will also kind of displace. So this is a very powerful feature that's well integrated to the entire render pipeline. And just for reference, this feature works with objects that are not just flat, but have a flat surface on them, like the top of this helipad. All right, so let's go and take a look at another example. So I've got a car here, and I've got the blue box here. It's reflecting on the ground. The car is reflecting. It's looking good, but I don't see the blue box reflecting on the car. So we wanted to come up with a solution that would help fake a reflection, but also render really, really fast. So let me show you what we came up with. I'm going to go inside of the scene setup, and I'm going to go to the car model here, and I'm going to click on it. I'm going to go down to the reflection mode, and we're going to change it to spherical. And what that will do is that will essentially create a spherical map from the center of the object outward. And anything that it captures in that map, it will render as its own reflection. So check this out. I've got a box. It's just a light box. And I'm going to hit OK. And right away, we can kind of see, and in the reflection settings, I can disable the spherical, or I can disable the mirror mode on the ground. And it's cool. It works pretty well. But check this out. I'm going to turn on that white box. Okay, so here it is up here. And I have it controlled by a null. So watch this. As I move it around, I can get it to create some really nice reflections across my car. What I can do is go into the scene setup, select that box object, go down to the material, go to the advanced, and turn off visible to camera. And we don't need it to cast shadows, and we can ignore the AO. We hit OK. So now we don't even see it, but it's creating some nice reflection for us. So it's not exactly ray tracing, but you're going to get some great results with some excellent performance. Here's another subtle example. So if I turn off the spherical map, it's no longer reflecting the ground. So by turning it on, I'm able to create a darker inside ring for that to look like it's actually sitting on the ground. So if we look in here closely, what if I take this ground surface and maybe change the color of it? Now you can really see how it is affecting the wheel and how it's inheriting a little bit of the color. All right, now I know a lot of you guys are going to be excited about our next feature, and that is real-time shadow mapping inside of Element 3D. So native shadows, and they look good, they render fast, and you definitely have a lot of control. So you have control over the map resolution. You can also kind of soften the map out, and there's options for spotlights and parallel lights. So we're really excited to have it. Now, one little side feature you might notice is that we have a particle size XYZ now. So you can actually stretch objects even non-uniformly and animate them in their particle settings. So that's how I set up that animation. All right, so let's take a look at a more advanced example with shadow. So here we have a city block from Metropolitan. And if we swing around here and look at this area right here, what I'm going to do is scroll down and go to the ambient occlusion. Now I'm going to turn off the ambient occlusion. So here's how the shadows look. They're just kind of casting a straight shadow. But when we turn on the ambient occlusion, it kind of looks like global illumination in a way, because we have some nice gradients in the shadow. But here's the cool new feature that we added. It's called light influence. So if we turn this down to 0, this is what the default method was doing. Basically, it was casting ambient occlusion across the entire image, which is not quite accurate when you have a direct light. So what happens is when you turn up this influence, it hides the ambient occlusion in the areas with direct sunlight. And if we look at the output for the ambient occlusion, you can see that it's a much more realistic of a result because of how it gets cut off. So if I were to change this back down, you would see that it's kind of thrown all around. But by tying it to the illumination, we can create a much more realistic result. So when we put it all back together, we get a really nice, really realistic result. Got our shadows, got our ambient occlusion, creating our global illumination, and it is looking good. Now, another feature related to shadows and ambient occlusion is a good matte shadow object. And what this allows you to do is cast a shadow onto your own video source or background. So in this case, we can just turn the background off, and we can see that we're kind of casting that shadow. We've got a light set up, and it's looking really good. And it's also really fast. So it's really easy to composite your 3D with your live action. All right, this next feature is really exciting, or at least I think it will be to a lot of people. So we all love real-time shadows, and we love real-time ambient occlusion. But sometimes we just need more accuracy. So what we've done is implemented ray-traced shadows and ray-traced ambient occlusion. So if I turn off the ambient occlusion and I turn off the shadows, what we have is the standard render from Element 3D. But now we can combine it with the ray-traced shadows and the ray-traced ambient occlusion and create some really impressive results. Now, the thing about ray-traced ambient occlusion is that it really creates a nice global illumination look, and it renders relatively fast for a ray tracer. Our ray tracer is GPU accelerated. It uses OpenCL, so it works on ATI and NVIDIA cards. Now, if you've ever seen a real-time ray trace renderer, you see the samples kind of fill in as the time goes by. So you can kind of see the frame fill up and the noise sort of slowly go away. Now, the way that After Effects works is you have to define how many samples you want. So if you want to get interactive performance, what you can do, set the render mode to preview, and that will lower the amount of ray trace samples, and you can actually move around and set your shot up pretty reasonably. Of course, it was a lot of work to get this ray tracing to work. We know it's not for everybody. We just figured there's going to be cases where you need that accuracy, and we wanted to make that feature available. So check it out, ray traced shadows and ray traced ambient occlusion. All right, I want to show you this next feature. It's called the auxiliary animation. So inside of Element 3D, we've got 5 groups. But watch what I can do with just a single group. So here I've got this spaceship, right? What I can do is I can select these engines on the outside. So I'll just select those, and I could move it around, okay? I could even take the rotation tool and I could rotate it, right? But what if I want to animate just this part in After Effects? Well, here's what I can do. If I select that object, I can come down here, we've got transform, and then we've got the auxiliary animation. And what I can do is output that to a channel. So in this case, I can output it to channel 1. So now if I hit OK, I can go inside of group 1, open up the auxiliary channel, and now I have access to the scale and the rotation, the opacity, and even some UV options. So this becomes extremely powerful because then you can create some simple rigs. Stuff like cars, stuff like helicopters, any kind of thing where you just need to grab a couple of parts and animate them together. And the other fun thing about it is that you can export multiple things to the same channel. So if I had a car, I could actually put 4 wheels onto a single channel, and if I rotated that forward, all of the wheels would rotate together with one single slider. So what's cool about this is that once I animate it, I can actually go into the particle replicator and move it all as a single object. So I can maybe have it, I don't know. All right, let's try this. So something like that, I guess. Another cool use is if you're doing a title and you want to control, say, one character. Well, what I can do is switch to mesh view, go to that extrusion object, and I could just click on the auxiliary animation, output this to, say, channel 1, hit OK, go to auxiliary channel 1, and then I can just rotate this or do something else with it and have full control over it. Amazing. All right, here's another really cool way to use the auxiliary animation. So go in the setup, and what I'm going to do is select the rotor. So I'm going to select this rotor, go down to the auxiliary animation, set it to channel 1. Then I'm going to click on the other one and set it to channel 1. So now I'm going to hit OK. And if I go down to group 1, auxiliary channel 1, I can animate the rotation. So let's see here. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Except this particular helicopter, these blades rotate opposite each other. So what you can do is go back in the setup, click on one of the rotors, and set the animation ratio for channel 1 to -100. And that will work kind of like an expression. So if I hit OK, now you're going to see that the rotors are going to rotate opposite of each other. So this is much more realistic, but also I'm controlling both rotors with a single slider. So it's a really cool feature, and hopefully you can do a lot with it. All right, you're probably too worn out to see any more features, but here's one more. We've got surface scattering. So for people who know what this is, bam. And I can kind of show you the idea. If we go to subsurface scattering and turn it off, we have a much more solid character. But if we turn it on, we've got like a translucent meat bag. So depending on what you're going for, and you have things like intensity, so you can control the type of meat, and you also can control the scattering. So that may not seem terribly useful because maybe you're not making a creature, whatever, right? But it's great for like porcelain. Let's say you're doing a statue and you want to have like a nice marble. Another example is with these green plants. So what kind of gives it this sort of lush feeling is that I have the subsurface scattering on. So we'll go down here. And so if I turn it off, that's what it looks like. I mean, sure, I could turn on some ambient light, but turning on the scattering actually creates the effect of the light penetrating through the leaves, as if the translucency of the leaves allows some of the light to pass through. We've also added a feature to automatically import MTL files. So if I open up an OBJ that has an MTL file, click Open, load materials, hit OK. And here they are, materials loaded up. Just go down to that glass, give it a little reflectivity. So, of course, you want to go and tweak the shaders, but most of the work is done. All right, so here's a cool feature if you feel like 5 groups is not enough. So after you've exhausted the scene system that allows you to add essentially unlimited objects into a group, after you have exhausted all of the auxiliary animation capabilities in order to rig and animate your object, and you have so many objects that you just have to have more groups, here's what you can do. Go to your layer that has element and add another copy of element. So in this case, I'm just going to duplicate this copy. Okay? And what it's going to do is overwrite this. But if you come down to the bottom, see it says render mode, change it from full render to unified render. And what it will do is only use the render settings from the top copy. So watch this. I'm going to go to group 1. I'm going to take this spacecraft and I'm going to move it down. And I'm going to move it forward. And now you can see both objects are intersecting fully, and I've created a super spaceship. No, but the point is now I've got 5 more groups. And yes, you can do this again. You can duplicate it again. As long as you have enough graphics card memory and you're feeling lucky, you can add some more groups by simply using the unified render. Now, there is one nice feature that I forgot to mention, and that is the enhanced multi-sampling. So it's similar to super sampling, except it's faster. So if I zoom into this area right here, see these kind of like speckled dots right here? If I turn on the enhanced multisampling, it actually cleans them up a lot nicer. So you can kind of see the difference there, rounds the edge a little bit better, and you can use it in combination with super sampling to get even better, cleaner results. So hopefully that will help out in some tricky situations. So if you're working with a client and they want to change the color of the background, you can just come over here to group 2, set the color to blue. You know, they don't like that, maybe white or gray or black, and they're like, nah, I don't like that. And then you just say, all right, I'll just turn it off, and they could just be floating. And they're like, perfect. So speed was definitely a top priority, and that's why we redesigned the UI as well. So inside of the new UI, we've made it faster, more organized. We've got group folders, and you can see this is actually output to group 1. And I can move things in and out, so I can take these headphones and drag them out. And I can move stuff inside of the folders, and I can have folders inside of folders. So some really cool things for organizing your files. Now, we've also got all the navigation controls, so we can move things around, we can duplicate things, we can rotate them, hold down shift and you can rotate by angle, all that cool stuff just to make the 3D scene a lot more productive. We wanted to make the render quality better as well, so we implemented a brand new physical shader system. So what this is a system that allows you to create more realistic materials based on real physical properties. So if we look at this kind of chrome material here, and I can actually just control click it, and it'll actually select it in the scene, and then I can scroll down and I can change the settings. So for example, I could change the tint color on the reflectivity, and this will actually, I could do like a gold color, and I could do blue, I could do any kind of a metallic color, and I instantly create that sort of a material. But what really makes the physical shader powerful is the glossiness slider. What this allows you to do is create sort of a blurred version of the reflection. Oh, another really cool feature of the UI is you can actually drag materials onto surfaces and change them. So it's just a handy way to be able to swap materials in and out. We really put a lot of work into this, and frankly, it almost killed us. But we didn't stop there. Let me show you some of the other cool new features in Element 3D version 2. One of my favorite new features is the 3D model deform tools. So what you can do is inside of each group in the particle look is a deform rollout. What this allows you to do is bend and twist and add noise to your 3D geometry. So in this case, I can turn up the intensity of this noise. I can create some really cool looks. I can animate it. I can add, a third dimensional distortion. There's a couple of different noise types that will just create, some various looks. And plus, inside of the advanced settings, there's a lot of cool controls for clamping the, the effect essentially, and you can invert it. I'm just playing around here, but you can really create some fun, very cool effects. You have the scale of the fractal, so it can be really bubbly or it could be really high frequency. Now, in this other example, you can actually control the XYZ intensity for the noise amount. So what that will do is stretch it in a specific axis. So you can see here, stretched that way or stretched vertically. And so you can really create some fun looks. Now, I have another example here. I'll go ahead and shut the depth of field off, but basically have some blobs with some subsurface scattering that's creating this sort of translucent look. Here I have a sphere, fairly low resolution, but look at this. Whoa. Start to create some pretty wild looks here. So this is just another cool example. And again, you can use it with the replicator. So you can set the particle amount and create, random replications. If I scroll down here, there's an option called randomize. So if that's off, all of the noise particles will be the same. But if you turn that on, it'll create a random seed for each of the particles in your object replicator. Here's just another look with a slightly different color scheme here, but same idea. We can even go to the twist amount and twist it up as we do the model noise. So it's a very fun thing to be able to animate and modify your renders in real time using Element 3D. So very cool. All right, so let's go and take a look at this example. So if I go into the scene setup, what we can see is I have a bunch of primitives that are just sort of stretched out. All right, so let's go and hit OK. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the particle look, go down to the deform settings, and I have the bend enabled. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn up the bend angle. So watch this. Look at that. So if it's 360 or negative 360, it'll actually come together in a perfect circle. All right, so we've got a nice bend going on. What else could we do? Well, we could go to the twist, turn that on, and say twist it on the y-axis. So check this out. And again, if we set this to 360, it's going to twist perfectly together as well as polygons can in this kind of a situation. Now I could increase the segments and smooth that out a bit, but you get the idea. We're creating this really cool, result, and it's all very interactive. Let's just go back here just a second. So let's go back to this point, right? I'll go to the replicator, set it to a plane, and I can increase the particle count. And now you can create some really cool, wild stuff. I don't even know what this is. Looks like some kind of like obstacle course for hamsters or something. All right, so I have another example here. I've got the Sony logo and I can bend it. Now notice I have a bend direction, so I can change the direction, so I can bend it up or I can bend it down depending on what you want, and of course on all of the other axes. So if you feel like it starts doing some weird thing, try one of the other axis modes. So let's go set this back. And so I can bend this, and I can bend it into a circle, right? But one problem is, what if I want to rotate this in a circle? So I come up to the particle rotation, start rotating it, but it's kind of off kilter, it's kind of off axis, right? Well, there's an option that we've added called center. And what this does is recenters the particle so that when you rotate it, it rotates it perfectly centered. So I can only imagine that someone from Sony is like saying, hey, stop using our logo. And I'm like, hey, don't get all bent out of shape, man. All right, I've got one more example here, and this is sort of this simulated water surface. So just kind of a cool little surface. Let me turn off the depth of field. All right, so if we look closely at the surface, we can actually see a little bit of deformation. We can see some layers sliding. We can actually see the bump map sliding along the surface. So this is actually a really cool setup. So it's not the perfect looking ocean, but what's really cool about it is I'm using the auxiliary animation to offset the UVs. All right, so in order to create this water surface, what I've done is I've taken a texture and I've blended it with 3 separate planes. So if I hide these real quick, you can see I have a base plane here with just kind of a wet looking bump map on it. And then I've got another layer which kind of a little bit of like a whitewash. And then I have another layer on top of that which is just a little bit more. So all 3 layers together kind of create, a nice ocean surface. So what's really interesting is that I'm using the auxiliary animation to output each of these planes to a separate channel. So channel 3, channel 1, channel 2. So if I hit OK, and I go to the particle auxiliary channels 1, 2, and 3, what I can actually do is I can offset the UV values. So the UV values are the texture values. So if you're using a tiled texture, like from Pro Shaders 1 or Pro Shaders 2, you can actually slide that around and create some secondary types of animations. All right, so another really cool feature is the per material wireframe. So if I click on our motorcycle green material, I can go down to the wireframe and turn it on. So now I have a wireframe that's only on this one material. So this just gives you a lot of options for creating, sort of high-tech looks, or even just having a quick effect go by. We can actually play around with the Fresnel effect on the wireframe, and it's all real time, so I can come up with some cool looks. So there's a lot of cool options here. Specifically, there's a fill mode, so I can set this to lines only, and then I can see the wireframe lines by themselves and it'll actually replace the actual mesh. Or I can change the color of the line to be from the material. So whatever the material settings are now going to be transferred over. So let's say I wanted to, change it to something else. I would actually be seeing the material. So that is the wireframe per material feature. So you can do some fun stuff with the wireframe. Now, another thing we've done is we've made our text extrusion tool even better. So what we've done is added an outline bevel option. So if I go into the element setup, I have an extrusion model here, and you can see there's a bevel outline, and if I just turn off the inside, you can see what that looks like. So it works exactly the same. If we click on the bevel, we have our bevel and our bevel outline settings. So what I can do is I can go down to the bevel outline. If I turn it off, here we just have a standard looking bevel, but if I turn it on, now I can control the outline width. And the other thing about this is all the other bevel settings work the same. So if I go to the bevel, I can go and play around with the bevel size, and I can play with the curve, so I can make the curve, in or out, depending on what I want it to look like. So that's definitely a very cool feature that you can combine with all of the normal bevel options. Now, here's another example using the bevel outline feature. I've sort of extruded some various circles using a simple shape, a mask in After Effects basically. And so you can use it to build some elaborate effects in addition to using the built-in primitives as well. So here's my project file here. We can collapse all the materials. So I've got some tubes, but then I've also got some extrusions, and it's just a mixture of different objects to create this fun shape. Now, here's another example of some good-looking bevels using the bevel outline feature. You can see it's kind of got the glass look to it, and just gives it a little bit of depth without just being a simple bevel like you're used to seeing. Now, lastly, this feature is really, really helpful. So I've got this car logo here, and the one thing about this is that it can sometimes be hard to line things up. So if I turn the camera off and I turn on my text layer that I've created, and what you can see is that my extrusion is the same size. And that's because we've added a new feature called Bevel World Scale. So what that will do is automatically keep the size of the text the same as the size of the text that you create. So if I were to take this text here, hit S, scale it up to 200, my 3D text is going to be recreated at the same size. So it doesn't use the same position because it has its own coordinate system, but the size of the font is exactly the same. And what's nice about that is that in the case of like a shield or something like this, what you could do is you could create multiple parts of your design using separate layers, and they'll all work together in the same relative scale. And of course, don't forget about the possibilities once you start using the bend and deform tools for your 3D text and 3D shapes. Another really useful feature is the per material transfer mode. And this is the ability to have transfer modes inside of your objects to create some really cool effects for HUD displays or UI designs and stuff like that. So let me just kind of run you through this project here. So we have real 3D objects combined with various layers of additive modes. We've got wireframe mixed in here, and just some cool mixtures of some various effects. Let me jump into the scene setup and we'll take a look. So it looks pretty crazy here. So if we just grab one of these objects and alt-click, we can kind of move it around. You see, basically it's a texture on a plane. And what I could do is if I go to the advanced setting, I can set the transfer mode to normal. And that's what it looks like. But we can now set it to add or screen. and it'll blend with the rest of the scene with transparency. Another thing we could do is we could go to the illumination and we could change the color, and this is a really, really cool feature, and you don't just have to do UI stuff. You could do smoke or fire, other type of additive effects that you want to blend inside of your 3D scenes. Here's another example using the additive mode. I created sort of like a energy galaxy kind of effect. And if we go into the setup, you can see we have some various planes with some textures on them. So these textures are being emitted on various groups. So I got group 1 and 2 and 3. And essentially, so on group 4 here, I can scale up the particle, and you can see that I've kind of creates like a swirl effect. I'm using the ring, so I could even decrease this to say 8. And because of the additive mode, we're actually getting some volumetric type of properties. This is actually some of the same techniques we did on the Star Trek title sequence as well. All right, so when you import an object into Element 3D that has multiple sub-meshes, so if we come over here, there's a mesh view, and we open up the car, we can see that the car is broken up into tons of little pieces. And in fact, I can control click on them, hold down Shift, and I can grab these parts and move them around. So essentially, there's a lot of little pieces. Now, if I hit OK, one of the cool things that you can do with Element 3D is use the multi-object system. So if we go to the particle look, there's a feature called multi-object. So if we enable that, it's off by default. But if we enable it, what we can do is we can scatter the pieces of this model around. So I can go to scatter, and I can do some really nice looking animations. But one thing that's happening here is that the floor is flying all over the place, and it's not quite doing what I want. So here's some solutions. So one thing I could do is I could put the floor onto a separate group like group 2, and that way it wouldn't move around. But let's say instead of a floor, it was a warehouse or something that was specific to my scene. Well, what you can do now in the new version of Element is that you can exclude objects from the multi-object system. So I can take the plane, click on Advanced, and it says Enable Multi-Object. We'll just uncheck that, hit OK. So now if I scatter the pieces around, the plane will stay put. So that's cool. But what about wanting to kind of create a very specific look or creating a very specific animation that isn't so random? Let's say I want to have the shell of the vehicle separate. So let's control click, and you can see here there's a sort of a shell on top. Well, what I'll do is I'll take that sub mesh. So remember, you have to be in mesh view. Click on auxiliary animation and set it to channel 1. Then go to the advanced, turn on multi-object. Instead of inherit, which will do whatever the object says, we're going to turn it off. So now if I hit OK, scroll down to the scatter here, and all of the pieces are going to scatter except for the chassis. So what good is that? Well, now what I can do is I can go to the auxiliary animation for channel 1, and I can move that separately and animate it in specifically when I want. So here's an example of that in action. All right, so it's kind of like a drunk transformer or something, so not too bad. But that's the idea, and you can really do some fun stuff because anytime you're using Element 3D's new group folder, so that's when you use a whole group and you output it to a specific channel, it's a virtual particle. So this virtual particle will scatter anything that's inside of it. So watch this. So let me just go over here to this project since it's already set up. And let me go down to the starter models. So we have just a couple of basic models. And one of the models happens to be this fractured ball. So let's just scale it down here. And let me drag it inside of the group folder here. And by the way, if you hit Z, It'll zoom in on the object you have selected. So this ball, by the way, if you can't see, if I hit F, you can look at the wireframe. The ball is actually fractured, so I can move the pieces of it around. So let's see what happens. I'm going to hit OK. All right, so pretty cool result. This is a dangerous thing to do because I never tried this before, and I'm glad it worked. So in addition to developing Element 3D version 2, we also created 3 new products that will help you take advantage of all the new features and all of the new capabilities. Backlight is a collection of HDRI environment maps as well as light maps in very high resolution. So I'm actually just going to use the 2K because that'll keep the memory usage down, and it pretty much gives you a really good result. So basically what you do is you just click on the environments and it changes your entire scene's lighting using the physical shader system. So basically, as you click through these, you can see they're all designed to have really cool, really nice looking reflections. You can go into the environment map and see it's loaded. You can also play around with the settings, so you can increase the brightness and you can play with the gamma to create even more looks. So this is the idea behind backlight. It's background lighting or image-based lighting to create more impressive looking reflections and illumination. Now, the other side of backlight are the individual light maps and the light arrays. So those are going to show up in your model browser. So if we come over here to the backlight, we're going to see light arrays and single lights. The single lights look something like this, and we can click on them and add them into the scene. So I'll click on this single light, and we'll just kind of move it up, and I'll rotate it. And you can actually see that it's affecting the light here. So I can even scale it a bit. And it gives a nice bit of reflection. We also have the light arrays. So these are the multi-lights. Now, you can also use the lights as design elements to create cool like light arrays. I know in this particular example, I just have the color tinted blue. You can duplicate these and you can really create some elaborate scenes. So with a little bit of work, you can actually do some really nice stuff with the reflections and gloss. This texture on the ground is actually from the Pro Shaders 2 collection. I think it's one of the concrete maps. So all of the products work really, really well together. All right, let's go and take a look at Pro Shaders 2. We've added some brand new categories, and there's over 300 materials to choose from. So we can go down to some concrete, and basically all you do is you take it and you drop it onto a surface that you want to change. So you can see beautiful looking reflectivity and gloss. If you want to test out the shader sampler, what you could do is go into the starter model and go down to the trophy, and you can load that and practice and experiment with different materials. So one of the main reasons that the materials look so realistic is that they're based on the physical properties of the environment. So if I go up to the environment settings, I can actually change stuff like the gamma and the brightness and even the saturation and change the overall look of all of my shaders. So this is helpful if you want to change the entire look of all the materials in your entire scene. Now, you can use some of the built-in environments, but we also offer Backlight, which is a collection of 50 8K environment maps. So you can see that they dramatically change the tone of your scene, and you can create more dramatic looks. You can create more studio lighting looks. So it's important to think about your material settings, but you also want to be thinking about how your environment is affecting your materials. And finally, let's go and take a look at the 3D Motion Design 2 model pack. So what is Motion Design 2? So it's a huge collection of all sorts of models. So this time we really focus on industrial, technological, high-tech, robotic. We really created some of the most incredible models that I have ever seen. The detail on these is absolutely amazing, and this is probably one of the more simple models. So basically, It's a collection of things that you can use to build other things. One of the things that we created are some really cool hinges and pistons and things that you can use to sort of dress your backgrounds of your sets. You could build really cool high-tech designs and titles. I actually used some of this equipment for a scene with some high-tech, supports for some aircrafts of the future. So just a little bit of detail. I'm actually using the Pro Shaders 2 textures to give it a little grunge. But these little things are essentially holding up these ships, and it just adds a ton of detail to the shot. All right, so let's go and take a look at the collection. So I'm going to jump inside the scene, and we'll come over here to the model browser, and I'll scroll down to the Motion Design 2 pack, and there really is just a ton of stuff. So we've got things called beams. So beams were one of my ideas of being able to build a virtual set for a title or for like a high-tech laboratory or something like that. Or maybe it's a futuristic stovetop. I don't know. That's what these objects were designed for, is not to be specific things, but so that you could go in and create interesting things out of it. So they're all set up with multiple materials so that you can apply materials to specific parts and really create what you want to create. So I've got another scene here, and I just put some bolts on here. So it looks just like a logo. Next thing you know, it's bolted down. It means it's serious business or something. But once you bring one of these out, you can just hold down Alt and drag it, and you can just place it. So they really didn't want this thing to go away, so they bolted it down pretty good. I would say maybe just one more over here. Nice. Yeah, there's a ton of different styles, and I mean, just look at the insane amount of quality on these. Like, it really is ridiculous. We could probably have made multiple packs out of all these models. So we got some really cool hinges. So the hinges are actually set up to be used with a multi-object auxiliary system. So if I control click, I can actually hit the rotation key and I can rotate this. So if you were to set up some group folders, you could do a little bit of, rigging to, create something that's connected to the backside of this and actually have it, control it to a certain degree. And you can see that the components have like really nice working parts. They're not just designed to look good. They actually do have some functionality. Really high quality liquid meshes. These, look at this. I already created an amazing design. Once you add red, the design's done. All right, so here's some really cool mech stuff. I mean, look at this, like literally. It's insane how much stuff is in here. This is the portal where everyone goes to and something happens. They bring back Magnum PI. So there's a bunch of different designs here. There's also some cool badges, and you can see these ribbons down here that you could use to throw, a title on there. And we've got some high-tech screens. These are really cool. So you need to put some video up on something, and you need some kind of high-tech screen, and the screen should be spinning out of control. You can completely do that in here. And I know the producer's like, no, we need to be spinning faster. And you just keep spinning that thing. He's going to love it. Moving on. All right, let's keep going. Shields. Oh my goodness, this pack never ends. Sunday night football. How about some Sunday night knitting for your wife? Make her a nice little graphic. She'd love it. Some lens flares. Mind blown. All right, let's see here. By the way, if you hit Z after you add an object, it will select that object. And think about how cool this would look with some deform on it as well. So you can, these models are really, really cool, but check this out. I open this up. Check that out. Not too bad. And of course, there's some more tech components. I mean, you're ready to make a sci-fi movie or some high-tech graphics immediately. And then we have an insane collection of tubes and pipes. So check this out. So I've got these tube systems that you could run some pipes along the wall. But look, if you alt drag these, they actually connect together. So you can create endless kinds of scenes. And even ones that don't look like they connect together, most of them are designed to connect. So see this one? Get out of here. Pretty cool. So pipes, definitely. So think about the scene in Jurassic Park where they're like looking and he's like, follow the pipes. You could make that scene. So here's just a quick little scene that I put together with a couple of the pipes, and I actually used some more of the Pro Shaders to give it more of a grungier pipe look. All right, so this is the Motion Design 2-pack. All right, thank you guys for watching. Element 3D version 2 will be available individually, and we're also gonna have some great bundles with all of these packs in it as well. Thanks again. I hope you guys check it out. I'm Andrew Kramer, and we will see you next time.